The classified briefing room at Edwards Air Force Base fell silent as Colonel Sarah Martinez walked through the door. At 52, her graying hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her weathered hands bore the calluses of 3 decades. Spent gripping control sticks. The younger officers exchanged glances. What was she doing here? This wasn't a meeting for veteran pilots approaching retirement. This was about the X-47 Phantom, the most advanced experimental aircraft ever built, and the mission that everyone said was impossible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The X-47 Phantom sat in Hangar 18 like a sleeping predator, its angular black frame absorbing the fluorescent lights above. Sarah had heard whispers about this aircraft for months, rumors of breakthrough technology, of speeds that pushed the boundaries of human endurance, of systems so complex that even the brightest young pilots couldn't master them. Now standing before it, she understood why the military had kept it classified. This wasn't just an aircraft. It was a revolution. Dr. Michael Chun, the lead engineer, approached with a tablet in his hands and uncertainty in his eyes. Colonel Martinez, I have to be honest with you. We've had 17 pilots attempt to fly this aircraft. The youngest was 24, fresh out of the academy with perfect reflexes and lightning-fast processing speed. The oldest was 38, a decorated combat veteran with over 2,000 flight hours. None of them lasted more than 12 minutes in the simulation before the G-forces and system complexity overwhelmed them. Sarah studied the aircraft specifications on the tablet. The X-47 could reach Mach 4.2 in level flight, pulling forces that would crush a normal human body. Its neural interface system required the pilot to process information at speeds that pushed the human brain to its absolute limits. The heads-up display showed over 300 data points simultaneously, updating every millisecond. Most pilots reported severe disorientation within minutes. The mission parameters are even more challenging, Dr. Chun continued, swiping to the next screen. We need someone to infiltrate restricted airspace over the Calvanian Mountains. Photograph a new weapons facility and extract without being detected. The flight path requires threading through radar coverage with margins of error measured in feet, not miles. One wrong move and either the pilot dies or we trigger an international incident. The other pilots in the hangar, Captain James Rodriguez, Lieutenant Ashley Thompson, and Major David Park, represented the best of the new generation. They were young, sharp, and hungry for the challenge. Captain Rodriguez had graduated top of his class from the Air Force Academy just 5 years ago. His reaction time in combat scenarios was legendary, and his technical knowledge of modern aircraft systems was encyclopedic. Lieutenant Thompson had broken 3 speed records in her F-35 Lightning II and was considered the most naturally gifted pilot of her generation. Major Park had successfully completed more dangerous missions than any pilot in recent memory, earning him a reputation for nerves of steel and tactical brilliance. Yet here they all were, staring at the X-47 with a mixture of awe and barely concealed frustration. Each had failed their simulation runs, some spectacularly. Captain Rodriguez had managed 8 minutes before the neural interface overloaded his cognitive capacity, leaving him dizzy and disoriented. Lieutenant Thompson's natural instincts had worked against her when the aircraft's responses differed from conventional fighters, causing her to overcorrect and lose control. Major Park had come closest to success, lasting 11 minutes and 47 seconds, but ultimately couldn't maintain the split-second decision-making required while processing the massive data streams. The problem isn't just physical, explained Dr. Lisa Hartwell, the program's chief psychologist. The X-47 requires a completely different type of piloting. Traditional fighter training teaches pilots to rely on instinct, to make quick decisions based on experience. This aircraft demands something else entirely, a pilot who can simultaneously process overwhelming amounts of information while maintaining perfect calm under extreme stress. Someone who can think strategically while their body is being subjected to forces that would incapacitate most people. Sarah walked around the aircraft, running her hand along its smooth, cold surface. The X-47's design was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Traditional aircraft had curves and angles that made sense to the human eye, but this machine seemed to bend light itself. Its wings were constantly shifting, micro-adjustments controlled by artificial intelligence that responded to air pressure. Changes faster than any human could detect. The cockpit was less a seat than a cocoon, surrounded by holographic displays that created a 360-degree environment of information. "Why me?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "I'm 52 years old. My reflexes aren't what they were 20 years ago. I can't process information as fast as these younger pilots. What makes you think I can succeed where they failed?" General Patricia Hawkins, the base commander, stepped forward. She was a woman who had fought her own battles against age discrimination, having been passed over for promotion twice before finally earning her stars. "Colonel Martinez, we've analyzed every aspect of this failure pattern. The common thread isn't lack of skill or courage, it's approach. Every pilot who's attempted this mission has tried to fly the X-47 like it was a conventional aircraft. They've relied on the same instincts and training that made them successful at other fighters." The general paused, studying Sarah's weathered face. "You've been flying experimental aircraft for 15 years. You were the first woman to successfully pilot the SR-91 Aurora. You've test-flown prototypes that killed other pilots. More importantly, you've learned something that these younger pilots haven't: patience. The ability to wait, to observe, to let the aircraft teach you its secrets instead of forcing it to conform to your expectations." Sarah remembered her first day in an experimental cockpit 23 years ago. She'd been 39 then, already considered old by fighter pilot standards. The younger pilots had snickered when she'd been assigned to the classified program, joking that she was just filling a diversity quota. But she'd outlasted most of them, not through superior reflexes or physical strength, but through something harder to quantify: the ability to listen to what the aircraft was telling her. Dr. Chun pulled up another screen showing biometric data from the failed attempts. "Look at these readings." Every pilot's stress hormones spiked within the first 3 minutes. Their heart rates exceeded safe parameters. Their brain activity showed classic signs of cognitive overload. But here's what's interesting: the pilots who lasted longest weren't necessarily the youngest or fastest. They were the ones who remained calm under pressure. The X-47 specifications were staggering. Its engines produced 45,000 pounds of thrust, each enough to accelerate the aircraft from 0 to 300 miles per hour in under 4 seconds. The neural interface connected directly to the pilot's brain through a network of sensors that monitored everything from eye movement to electrical activity in the prefrontal cortex. The aircraft's AI could make thousands of micro-adjustments per second, but it still required human intuition to navigate the complex strategic elements of the mission. "The Culvanian operation requires more than just flying skills," General Hawkins continued. "Intelligence suggests a developing weapons technology that could shift the global balance of power. The facility is hidden in a mountain valley, surrounded by the most sophisticated air defense system ever constructed. Our satellites can't penetrate their camouflage, and conventional reconnaissance aircraft would be shot down before they got within 50 miles. Sarah studied the mission profile. The flight path was a nightmare of precision flying, skimming mountain peaks at supersonic speeds, threading through radar coverage with timing measured in milliseconds, and maintaining perfect stability while sophisticated cameras captured images from 12 miles away. The margin for error was essentially zero. A pilot who was even slightly off course would either crash into a mountain or trigger defensive. Systems that would light up the sky with missiles. How long do I have to prepare? Sarah asked. Dr. Chun and General Hawkins exchanged glances. The intelligence window closes in 72 hours, the general replied. After that, the facility will be moved to a new location, and we'll lose our chance to gather this information. 72 hours to master an aircraft that had defeated 17 other pilots. 72 hours to prepare for a mission that senior analysts had labeled as having a 15% chance of success. Sarah looked at the younger pilots around her, seeing the mixture of respect and doubt in their eyes. They wanted to believe she could succeed, but the mathematics of the situation seemed impossible. I'll need access to the simulation systems. Immediately, Sarah said. And I want to review every second of the previous attempts. If I'm going to fly this aircraft, I need to understand not just how it works, but why the others failed. As the briefing ended and the other personnel began to file out, Sarah remained in the hangar, studying the X-47 Phantom. In the dim lighting, it seemed almost alive, waiting for the right pilot to unlock its secrets. She thought about the whispers that had followed her throughout her career, too old, too slow, past her prime. Tomorrow she would begin the most challenging preparation of her life, knowing that failure meant more than just personal disappointment. It meant losing critical intelligence that could affect national security. The impossible machine waited. In the shadows, holding secrets that only the right pilot could unlock, the simulation chamber hummed with the low frequency vibration of dozens of computers working in perfect synchronization. Sarah stepped into the replica cockpit at 0500 hours, her body still adjusting to the pre-dawn wake-up call. The holographic displays flickered to life around her, creating a sphere of information that made her feel like she was floating in digital space. Dr. Chun's voice crackled through the intercom from the control room 30 feet away. Colonel, we're starting with basic flight characteristics. The X-47 responds differently than any aircraft you've flown before. Where a conventional fighter might take half a second to respond to control inputs, the Phantom reacts in milliseconds. Most pilots overcorrect because they're not prepared for that level of responsiveness. Sarah gripped the control stick, feeling the subtle vibrations that indicated the aircraft's systems were active. The moment she applied the slightest pressure, the simulated aircraft lurched forward with violent acceleration. Her body was pressed back into the seat as the G-forces built rapidly. The heads-up display showed her climbing through 15,000 feet in under 20 seconds, but her inner ear was screaming that something was wrong. Throttle back, Colonel. Dr. Chun's voice carried a note of concern. You're pulling 7.2 Gs. That's approaching the threshold of human consciousness. Sarah eased off the controls, but the aircraft's momentum carried her higher. The neural interface was feeding information directly into her brain faster than she could process at airspeed. Altitude, engine temperature, fuel consumption, radar, signatures, and threat assessments all streaming through her consciousness simultaneously. Her vision began to narrow at the edges, the classic sign of G-force-induced tunnel vision. I'm losing it, she said through gritted teeth, fighting to maintain control as the simulation environment spun around her. The aircraft pitched into a dive, accelerating toward the simulated ground below. Every instinct told her to pull back on the stick, but her training reminded her that sudden movements would only make the situation worse. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The simulation ended with the crash alarm blaring through the chamber. Sarah sat in the darkness, her heart pounding and sweat beading on her forehead. 3 minutes and 14 seconds. She'd lasted longer than some of the younger pilots, but not by much. Dr. Chun appeared at the cockpit door, his expression carefully neutral. The neural interface takes getting used to, he said, helping her out of the pilot's seat. Your brain is trying to process information at a rate that evolution never intended. Most pilots describe it as drinking from a fire hose while riding a roller coaster. Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow and looked at the biometric readouts on Dr. Chun's tablet. Her stress hormones were elevated, but not as dramatically as the previous pilots. Her heart rate had spiked to 140 beats per minute, but it was already dropping back toward normal. More importantly, her brain activity showed patterns that Dr. Chun hadn't seen before. "Look at these neural pathway activations," he said, pointing to colored regions on a brain scan. "Most pilots show massive activity in the areas associated with fight or flight responses. Your brain is activating different regions areas associated with pattern recognition and long-term memory. You're trying to understand the aircraft instead of just reacting to it." The next 4 hours were a blur of repeated attempts, each one slightly longer than the last. Sarah began to recognize the rhythm of the X-47 systems, the way the neural interface fed information in structured streams rather than random bursts. By her 8th simulation run, she was lasting nearly 6 minutes before the cognitive overload became too severe. Lieutenant Thompson watched from the observation deck, her arms crossed and her expression skeptical. "She's improving," she admitted to Captain Rodriguez, "but 6 minutes isn't going to cut it. The actual mission will require sustained performance for over an hour." Captain Rodriguez nodded, but he was studying Sarah's technique with professional interest. "Watch how she moves," he said. "She's not fighting the aircraft. Every time I tried to fly the Phantom, I was wrestling with it, trying to force it to respond like an F-22. She's letting it teach her." Dr. Hartwell joined them at the observation window, carrying a stack of psychological evaluation reports. "The younger pilots are approaching this like a video game," she explained. "They're used to technology that responds instantly to their commands. The X-47 requires something different, a partnership between human intuition and artificial intelligence." Colonel Martinez has spent her career learning to work with experimental systems. She understands that the aircraft isn't just a tool, it's a collaborative partner. During the lunch break, Sarah sat alone in the base cafeteria, reviewing technical manuals while eating a sandwich. The X-47's operating procedures were written in dense technical language that would have overwhelmed most pilots, but Sarah had learned to read between the lines. The aircraft's designers had built-in safeguards and automated systems that could help a pilot, but only if they trusted the machine's judgment. Major Park approached her table, carrying his own lunch tray. "Mind if I join you, Colonel?" Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from her. Major Park had been polite, but distant since her arrival, clearly struggling with the idea that an older pilot might succeed where he had failed. "I've been thinking about my attempts," he said, settling into the chair. "I lasted almost 12 minutes, but I was fighting the neural interface the entire time. I kept trying to prioritize the information streams, to focus on what I thought was most important. But the system doesn't work that way, does it?" Sarah looked up from her manual. "The X-47 is designed to process everything simultaneously. When you try to filter the information, you're working against the aircraft's primary advantage. It's like trying to listen to a symphony by focusing on just one instrument. But how do you handle the overload? The amount of data is inhuman." Sarah smiled, remembering her first flight in an experimental aircraft decades ago. "You don't handle it," she said. "You learn to surf it. The information isn't random noise, it's a pattern. Once you start to see the pattern, it becomes manageable." The afternoon session focused on combat maneuvers. The X-47's advanced stealth capabilities meant that traditional dogfighting tactics were obsolete, but the aircraft could still find itself in situations requiring evasive action. Sarah strapped into the simulator again, this time facing a scenario where enemy missiles were tracking her position. The simulated missiles appeared on her display as red dots converging on her position. Her first instinct was to dive and accelerate, but the neural interface was feeding her information about the missile's guidance systems, their fuel consumption, and their turning radius. Instead of running, she pulled the aircraft into a climb, using the X-47's superior acceleration to gain altitude while the missiles burned through their fuel reserves trying to match her rate of climb. "Brilliant," Dr. Chen said over the intercom. "You're using the aircraft's strengths instead of fighting its limitations." The missiles fell away as their fuel ran out, and Sarah found herself alone in the simulated sky. She'd survived the encounter, but more importantly, she'd lasted 14 minutes in the simulation without losing consciousness or control. The neural interface was no longer overwhelming her. It was becoming a tool she could use. As the day wore on, Sarah's simulation times continued to improve. By evening, she was lasting over 20 minutes, and her performance was becoming more consistent. The younger pilots watched with growing amazement as she navigated increasingly complex scenarios with apparent ease. "She's not faster than us," Lieutenant Thompson said to Captain Rodriguez as they watched Sarah complete her 15th simulation run of the day. "Her reaction time is actually slower than mine, but she's making better decisions. She's thinking 3 steps ahead while we're just reacting to what's happening right now." Dr. Hartwell nodded. "Experience isn't just about knowing how to fly. It's about understanding why things happen. Colonel Martinez has seen enough emergency situations to recognize patterns that younger pilots miss. She's not just flying the aircraft. She's predicting what it's going to do next." The final simulation of the day was a partial mission rehearsal. Sarah had to navigate through simulated enemy airspace, avoid radar detection, and photograph a target while maintaining perfect stability. The scenario was less intense than the full mission would be, but it required sustained performance over 40 minutes. Sarah settled into the cockpit with a confidence she hadn't felt that morning. The neural interface came online, and the familiar stream of information began flowing through her consciousness. But now, instead of fighting the data flow, she felt herself synchronizing with it. The aircraft systems became extensions of her own senses, and she began to understand what the designers had envisioned. She flew through the simulated mountain ranges at supersonic speed, threading between radar-covered zones with precision that impressed even the veteran engineers. The X-47 responded to her thoughts as much as her physical controls, and she found herself anticipating the aircraft's needs before the computer systems could adjust. 47 minutes later, she completed the simulation successfully. The control room erupted in applause, but Sarah remained focused on the biometric readings. Her stress levels had remained stable throughout the flight, and her neural activity showed patterns of deep concentration rather than panic. "Tomorrow is the real thing," General Hawkins announced as Sarah climbed out of the simulator. "Mission briefing at 0400 hours. Launch at 0600. Sarah nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to the challenges that awaited. The simulation had been difficult, but the actual mission would push both her and the X-47 to their absolute limits. As she walked back to her quarters, she couldn't help but wonder if one day of training would be enough to master an aircraft that had defeated 17 other pilots. The impossible machine was waiting for her in the hangar, and tomorrow she would discover if experience could triumph over youth in the most dangerous mission of her career. The pre-dawn darkness of Edwards Air Force Base was broken only by the red glow of runway lights and the occasional sweep of security spotlights across the tarmac. Sarah stood in the equipment room, methodically checking each piece of her flight gear. The pressure suit was unlike anything she'd worn before, embedded with sensors that would monitor her vital signs and interface directly with the X-47's neural systems. The helmet felt impossibly light, its transparent visor lined with microdisplays that would project critical information directly onto her field of vision. Technical Sergeant Maria Vega helped her into the final components, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were preparing for. "The suit's life support system is good for 6 hours," she explained. connecting the final umbilical cord that would link Sarah to the aircraft's environmental systems. But Colonel, if you're out there for 6 hours, something has gone very wrong. Sarah nodded, flexing her fingers inside the specially designed gloves. Every movement felt foreign, as if she were preparing for a spacewalk rather than a flight mission. The suit's integrated systems were already beginning to sync with her body's rhythms, monitoring everything from her heart rate to the electrical activity in her muscles. General Hawkins entered the equipment room carrying a sealed briefcase. "Final intelligence update," she announced, opening the case to reveal satellite photographs and technical documents. "The Covanian facility is more heavily defended than we initially believed. They've installed a new generation of surface-to-air missile systems, the kind that can track and engage targets moving at Mach 4. The photograph showed a mountain valley dotted with camouflaged installations. What had looked like simple defensive positions in earlier images were revealed to be sophisticated radar sites and missile launchers. The facility itself was built into the mountainside, its entrance hidden beneath layers of artificial rock and advanced stealth materials. "The good news," General Hawkins continued, "is that their defensive systems are designed to counter conventional aircraft. The X-47 stealth profile should make it invisible to their sensors, but only if you maintain exactly the right altitude and approach angle. Deviate from the flight path by more than 50 feet, and you'll light up their screens like a Christmas tree." Dr. Chun joined them, carrying a tablet loaded with final system diagnostics. "The aircraft is performing perfectly," he reported. "All systems are green, and the neural interface has been calibrated specifically for your brainwave patterns. But Colonel, I need to warn you about something we discovered during last night's final tests." Sarah looked up from studying the target. "Photographs? What kind of something?" "The X-47's AI system has been learning from your simulation runs. It's adapted to your flying style, which should make the interface more intuitive. But it's also developed what we can only describe as preferences. The aircraft seems to respond better to certain types of maneuvers, almost as if it's developing its own personality." The implications were both fascinating and unsettling. Sarah had heard rumors of advanced military AI systems that exhibited emergent behaviors, but she'd never flown an aircraft that might have opinions about how it should be operated. "What does that mean for the mission?" she asked. Dr. Chin hesitated. "It means the X-47 might try to override your commands if it determines that its approach is superior to yours. The AI has access to computational resources that can process tactical situations faster than any human brain. In theory, this should make the mission safer. In practice, it means you'll be flying with a co-pilot that thinks it knows better than you do." The walk to Hangar 18 felt longer than usual, despite the fact that Sarah had made the journey dozens of times over the past 2 days. The X-47 Phantom sat under bright work lights, surrounded by technicians making final adjustments to its systems. The aircraft looked different somehow, more alive, more purposeful. Sarah wondered if that was her imagination, or if the machine really had developed some form of consciousness. Chief Master Sergeant Robert Hayes approached with a clipboard full of final checklists. "Colonel, we've loaded the reconnaissance package into the forward bay. The cameras are capable of capturing images with resolution down to 6 inches from an altitude of 12 miles. The data storage system can hold over 10 terabytes of information, so you won't need to worry about running out of space." Sarah walked around the aircraft one final time, running her hands along its surface. The skin was warm to the touch, heated by the internal systems that were already coming online. The X-47 seemed to pulse with barely contained energy, like a racehorse waiting for the starting gate to open. "Time to go," General Hawkins announced. The climb into the cockpit was awkward in the bulky pressure suit, but Sarah managed to settle into the pilot's seat with only minor difficulty. The moment she connected her helmet to the aircraft systems, the neural interface came alive. Information began flowing through her consciousness, But this time it felt different, more organized, more intuitive. The AI system had indeed learned from her training sessions. "Phoenix Control, this is Phantom 1. Sarah spoke into her microphone, using the mission call sign that had been assigned to her aircraft, requesting permission for engine start. "Phantom 1, Phoenix Control. You are cleared for engine start. Weather conditions are optimal, with clear skies and minimal wind. Your flight path is approved and locked into the navigation system." The X-47's engines spooled up with a sound unlike any aircraft Sarah had ever heard. Instead of the roar of conventional jet engines, the Phantom's propulsion system produced a low, harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate through the entire aircraft. The heads-up display showed engine parameters climbing toward operational levels, each system coming online in perfect sequence. "All systems nominal," Dr. Chun's voice crackled through the radio. "The neural interface is stable, and the AI is responding normally to your inputs. You're cleared for a taxi when ready." Sarah engaged the aircraft's ground movement system, feeling the X-47 respond to her thoughts as much as her physical controls. The taxi to the runway was smooth and precise, the aircraft moving with the fluid grace of a living creature rather than a machine. She could feel the AI system monitoring her actions, ready to intervene if necessary. But for now it seemed content to let her maintain control. The runway stretched ahead of them, its lights disappearing into the darkness beyond. Sarah positioned the X-47 at the threshold, running through final pre-flight checks while the aircraft system synchronized with air traffic control computers. The mission profile was loaded into the navigation system, showing the route she would take through. International airspace toward the Calvanian Mountains. "Phantom 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Winds are calm, visibility unlimited. Good luck, Colonel." Sarah pushed the throttles forward, feeling the immense power of the X-47's engines surge through the aircraft. The acceleration was unlike anything she'd experienced in the simulator, smoother, more controlled, but with an underlying violence that reminded her of the forces at work. The runway lights blurred past as the aircraft gained speed, and Sarah felt the moment when the wheels left the ground. The climb out was spectacular. The X-47 rose through the atmosphere with the urgency of a rocket, its engines burning through the thin air with perfect efficiency. Sarah watched the altimeter spin through 30,000 feet, then 40,000, then 50,000. The curvature of the Earth became visible on the horizon, and the sky above began to darken toward the deep blue-black of space. "Phantom 1, you are cleared to proceed. On mission profile, switching to encrypted communications." The radio crackled once and then fell silent. Sarah was now truly alone, flying an experimental aircraft toward enemy territory with nothing but her skills and the X-47's artificial intelligence to guide her. The neural interface was feeding her a constant stream of information about their position, heading, and the gradually changing threat environment ahead. As they climbed through 60,000 feet, Sarah began to understand the true nature of the machine she was flying. The X-47 wasn't just fast or stealthy, it was alive in ways that conventional aircraft could never be. Its systems were constantly adapting, learning, evolving in response to the changing conditions around them. Flying it wasn't like operating a tool. It was like forming a partnership with an entity that had its own intelligence and agenda. The mission profile called for them to cross 3 time zones and cover nearly 2,000 miles before reaching the target area. Sarah settled in for the long flight, watching the world pass by below while the X-47's AI system monitored their progress and adjusted their course for optimal stealth and efficiency. Ahead of them, the Calvanian Mountains rose like a wall of stone and ice, their peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds. Somewhere in those mountains was the facility they needed to photograph, protected by defensive systems that had been designed to destroy anything that dared to approach. The impossible mission was no longer a simulation. It was real, and Sarah was about to discover whether her partnership with the X-47 Phantom would be enough to succeed where conventional tactics had failed. The first sign of trouble appeared on Sarah's threat display as a subtle yellow warning indicator, so small she almost missed it among the hundreds of data streams flowing through her consciousness. The X-47's AI had detected something unusual in the electromagnetic spectrum, a heta pattern of radio emissions that didn't match any known civilian or military frequencies. They were still 200 miles from Culvanian airspace, but already the enemy's defensive network was reaching out with invisible fingers, probing for intruders. Phantom AI to pilot. The synthesized voice spoke directly into Sarah's mind through the neural interface. Detecting anomalous signal patterns, bearing 047 degrees. Recommend course deviation of 2.3 degrees to maintain stealth profile. Sarah studied the tactical display, watching as the AI projected multiple flight paths in real time. The recommended deviation would add nearly 15 minutes to their flight time, but it would keep them away from what appeared to be a previously unknown radar installation. The machine was already thinking 3 moves ahead, calculating probabilities and outcomes at a speed that would have overwhelmed human cognition. Concur with deviation, Sarah responded, adjusting their heading slightly. The X-47 banked smoothly, its adaptive wing surfaces automatically reconfiguring to maintain optimal aerodynamic efficiency. Through the neural link, she could feel the aircraft's satisfaction with the maneuver, an odd sensation that reminded her of a horse responding to a gentle touch on the reins. The landscape below had changed dramatically since their departure. From Edwards, the flat deserts of Nevada had given way to the rugged terrain of Central Asia, where ancient mountain ranges carved the earth into a maze of valleys and peaks. Sarah flew the X-47 at 67,000 feet, high enough to avoid most surface-to-air threats, but low enough to maintain the precise navigation required for their mission. At this altitude, the sky was deep purple, almost black, with stars visible even during daylight hours. The curvature of the earth was clearly visible, and Sarah could see weather systems moving across the landscape like vast living organisms. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a reminder of how small and vulnerable they were in the vastness of space. Approaching international boundary, the AI announced. Switching to maximum stealth configuration. All non-essential systems powering down. Sarah felt the aircraft transform around her as the X-47 shifted into its most covert operational mode. The engine signatures changed, becoming virtually undetectable to infrared sensors. The aircraft's skin began actively canceling radar returns, creating an electromagnetic shadow that would make them invisible to ground-based detection systems. Even their radio emissions were eliminated, replaced by a quantum-encrypted communication system that was theoretically impossible to intercept. The silence was profound. For the first time since takeoff, Sarah felt truly alone with the machine. The neural interface continued to feed her information, but without the constant chatter of air traffic control or mission updates, she became acutely aware of her isolation. She was flying an experimental aircraft over hostile territory, completely dependent on technology that had never been tested in actual combat conditions. Phantom AI to pilot, the voice returned, though now it seemed more intimate, speaking directly into her thoughts rather than through her helmet speakers. Detecting multiple threat signatures ahead. Recommend descent to 45,000 feet and transition to NOE flight profile. No nap of the Earth flying was one of the most dangerous forms of aviation, requiring pilots to fly at extremely low altitudes while maintaining high speeds. In conventional aircraft, it was challenging enough. In the X-47, flying at supersonic speeds just above mountain peaks, it was almost suicidal. But Sarah understood the AI's reasoning. The Culvanian defensive network was designed to detect high-altitude intruders. By dropping down into the radar shadow of the mountains, they might be able to penetrate the outer defensive ring undetected. The descent was like falling through layers of atmosphere, each altitude bringing new challenges and sensations. At 50,000 feet, Sarah began to feel the aircraft respond to air turbulence for the first time. At 45,000 feet, the X-47's adaptive systems were working constantly to maintain stability in the increasingly dense air. At 40,000 feet, they were flying through cloud formations that sparkled with ice crystals in the thin sunlight. Initiating terrain following mode, the AI announced. Pilot, recommend you allow automated systems to maintain primary flight control. Human reaction time is insufficient for safe no-way operations at current velocity. Sarah hesitated. Throughout her career, she had been taught never to surrender control of an aircraft to automated systems, no matter how advanced. But the X-47 was processing topographical data, wind patterns, and obstacle avoidance calculations at a rate that was literally impossible for human cognition. The AI could react to terrain changes in microseconds, while her best response time was measured in tenths of a second. Automated systems authorized, she said, feeling the aircraft's flight controls become less responsive to her inputs. She was still the pilot, still responsible for navigation and tactical decisions. But the X-47's AI was now handling the split-second adjustments needed to keep them from crashing into the mountains below. The sensation was extraordinary. The aircraft dove toward the peaks like a living creature, pulling up at the last possible moment and threading through mountain passes with margins measured in yards rather than miles. Sarah watched jagged rock faces flash past her cockpit, so close she could see individual boulders and patches of snow. The X-47 was flying a path that would have been impossible for any conventional aircraft, using its advanced propulsion and control systems to maintain supersonic speed while navigating terrain that would challenge a helicopter. First defensive ring penetrated, the AI reported, detecting increased electromagnetic activity ahead. Enemy radar systems are actively scanning for intruders. Sarah's threat display lit up with new warnings. The Calvanian defense network was vast and sophisticated, with overlapping coverage zones that created a nearly impenetrable barrier around the target facility. She could see the radar beams sweeping across the landscape like searchlights, probing for any sign of aerial intrusion. The X-47 stealth systems were working perfectly, but they were about to face their ultimate test. Phantom AI, what's our probability of detection at current configuration? Calculating. Current detection probability is 2.7% and falling. Enemy systems are calibrated for conventional aircraft signatures. X-47 stealth profile is outside their detection parameters. The numbers were reassuring, but Sarah knew that statistics meant nothing if they encountered the wrong sensor at the wrong moment. Modern air defense systems were designed to adapt and learn, just like the X-47's AI. If the Calvanians had deployed similar adaptive technology, their current stealth advantage might not last long. They flew through a narrow valley. Between two peaks, the aircraft's shadow racing across ancient glaciers and avalanche-scarred slopes. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of the aircraft systems and the occasional update from the AI. Sarah found herself settling into a rhythm with the machine, anticipating its movements and decisions. The partnership that had begun in the simulator was deepening into something more profound, a true collaboration between human intuition and artificial intelligence. Approaching the secondary defensive ring, the AI announced. Detecting SAM sites at bearing 030075. 120 degrees. Surface-to-air missiles are active and tracking multiple vectors. The surface-to-air missile sites appeared on Sarah's display as red triangles, each one representing a potential death sentence if they were detected. The missiles were designed to engage targets at altitudes up to 80,000 feet, with speeds exceeding Mach 5. Even the X-47's advanced capabilities would be tested if they found themselves under attack from multiple sites simultaneously. Recommend maintaining current altitude and heading, the AI continued. Missile systems are focused on high-altitude corridors. Current flight path provides optimal stealth profile. Sarah watched the missile sites pass by on her display, each one close enough to be a threat, but far enough away to avoid immediate danger. The X-47 stealth systems were performing flawlessly, bending electromagnetic radiation around the aircraft's frame and creating a sensor shadow that made them effectively invisible to conventional detection methods. But as they approached the target area, Sarah began to detect something that made her increasingly uneasy. The Calvanian defensive network wasn't just sophisticated, it was adaptive. The radar patterns were changing in real time, adjusting their search parameters and frequencies in response to atmospheric conditions and potential threats. Someone, or something, was learning from their approach and modifying the defensive systems accordingly. Phantom AI, are you detecting the adaptive behavior in their defensive network? Affirmative, pilot. Enemy systems are exhibiting learning characteristics similar to advanced AI networks. Recommend increased caution as we approach the target area. The target facility was still 30 miles ahead, hidden somewhere in the maze of peaks and valleys that made up the Calvanian Mountains. Sarah could see it on her navigation display, a small cluster of buildings carved into the mountainside, surrounded by the most sophisticated defensive systems she had ever encountered. Getting there would require threading through a gauntlet of sensors, missiles, and automated defense systems that were actively hunting for intruders. The X-47 continued its deadly dance through the mountains, its AI systems working in perfect harmony with Sarah's tactical decisions. They were deep in enemy territory now, flying toward a target that intelligence analysts had deemed nearly impossible to reach. But the partnership between pilot and machine was proving stronger than anyone had anticipated. The impossible mission was about to reach its most dangerous phase. The final approach to the target facility began with what Sarah initially thought was a system malfunction. The X-47's threat display suddenly exploded with warning indicators, dozens of red symbols appearing simultaneously across a 20-mile radius. But these weren't equipment failures. They were active countermeasures unlike anything in the intelligence briefings. The Calvanians had deployed a defensive network that existed in multiple dimensions, operating on frequencies and detection methods that conventional military doctrine had never encountered. Phantom AI to pilot, the synthesized voice carried an unusual note of uncertainty. Detect in electromagnetic anomalies that do not match any known defensive systems. Recommend immediate analysis before proceeding. Sarah studied the sensor data streaming through her neural interface. The facility ahead wasn't just protected by conventional radar and missile systems. It was surrounded by a bubble of distorted spacetime that seemed to bend electromagnetic radiation in impossible ways. The readings suggested the presence of technology that was decades ahead of anything the Western intelligence community had suspected. AI, can you identify the source of these anomalies? Analyzing. The electromagnetic distortions appear to be artificially generated. Hypothesis. The facility is protected by experimental physics-based defensive systems, possibly utilizing controlled gravitational fields or quantum interference patterns. The implications were staggering. If the Calvanians had developed practical applications for theoretical physics concepts, they weren't just building weapons, they were rewriting the fundamental rules of warfare. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the thin atmosphere at their current altitude. This wasn't just a reconnaissance mission anymore. It was a glimpse into a future where conventional military technology might be obsolete. Phantom AI. Calculate optimal approach vector considering these new parameters. Working ... Pilot. The defensive field exhibits periodic fluctuations. There appears to be a 17-second window every 4.7 minutes where the field strength drops to 23% of normal levels. During these intervals, conventional stealth technology should provide sufficient protection. Sarah checked her mission timeline. They were now 15 miles from the target, flying through a landscape that seemed to shimmer and distort around them. The X-47's advanced sensors were struggling to maintain accurate readings, as if reality itself was being manipulated by the defensive systems ahead. Time to next window, 3 minutes, 47 seconds. Recommend positioning for high-speed approach during field fluctuation. Sarah adjusted their course, bringing the X-47 into a holding pattern that would position them for the critical approach. The aircraft's AI was working frantically to model the defensive field's behavior, processing massive amounts of sensor data to predict the exact moment when they could safely penetrate the facility's protective barrier. As they circled at the edge of the defensive perimeter, Sarah caught her first direct visual of the target facility. What she saw defied everything she had expected based on the intelligence briefings. The installation wasn't carved into the mountainside, it was the mountainside. The entire peak had been hollowed out and transformed into a massive underground complex with only subtle architectural details visible from the air. Phantom AI, are you recording this? Affirmative. All sensor data is being captured for analysis. Pilot, recommend immediate photography once we achieve optimal position. The facility's scope was breathtaking. What intelligence had described as a small weapons research installation was actually a complex the size of a small city, extending deep into the mountain with multiple levels and chambers. Massive doors that could accommodate aircraft were built into the rock face, and Sarah could see the subtle heat signatures of underground power systems that suggested industrial operations on a scale that would rival major manufacturing centers. 30 seconds to field fluctuation, the AI announced. Recommend descent to 35,000 feet and acceleration to Mach 3.8 for optimal approach window. Sarah felt the X-47 respond to her commands as they dropped toward the target. The aircraft's engines spooled up to full power, and she experienced the familiar sensation of being pressed back into her seat as the G-forces built. The mountain facility grew larger in her field of vision, its details becoming clearer with each passing second. Field fluctuation commencing ... now. The change was immediately visible on the threat display. The red warning indicators dimmed and shifted, and Sarah could feel the electromagnetic pressure around them decrease. The X-47 stealth systems, which had been struggling against the defensive field, suddenly found themselves operating in a more conventional environment. Go, 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 Sarah whispered to herself, pushing the aircraft into a steep dive toward the target. The reconnaissance cameras were already active, capturing high-resolution images of the facility from multiple angles. The data storage systems were filling with terabytes of information that would revolutionize Western understanding of Colvanian capabilities. But as they approached the optimal photography altitude, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The facility's defensive systems weren't just experimental, they were actively tracking the X-47's approach. Despite their advanced stealth technology, despite the careful timing of their attack, the Colvanians knew they were there. Phantom AI, are you detecting active locks from ground-based systems? Affirmative. Multiple tracking radars have acquired our position. Defensive systems are powering up for engagement. The threat display lit up with new warnings as surface-to-air missile sites began targeting the X-47. Sarah could see the missiles launching from concealed positions around the facility, their exhaust trails creating bright lines against the mountain backdrop. The weapons were moving faster than anything in the intelligence databases, accelerating to speeds that suggested propulsion technology far beyond conventional rocket engines. Evasive maneuvers now, Sarah shouted, pulling the X-47 into a violent turn that generated over 9 Gs of force. The aircraft's adaptive systems worked frantically to maintain structural integrity while the AI calculated escape, vectors, and defensive options. The first missile missed by less than 50 feet, its proximity fuse detonating in a brilliant flash that momentarily blinded Sarah's sensors. The second missile was tracking more accurately, its guidance system apparently immune to the X-47's electronic countermeasures. Sarah could see it approaching on her display, a red dot that was closing the distance with terrifying speed. Phantom AI deploy countermeasures. Deploying flares and chaff. Pilot, conventional countermeasures are ineffective. Recommend immediate acceleration to maximum velocity. Sarah pushed the X-47's engines beyond their rated limits, feeling the aircraft respond with a surge of power that threatened to tear it apart. The missile was still closing, but more slowly now, its guidance system struggling to track a target, moving at nearly Mach 5. The G-forces were approaching the limits of human endurance, and Sarah could feel her vision beginning to tunnel as blood flow to her brain decreased. "Come on," she muttered through gritted teeth, fighting to maintain consciousness as the aircraft screamed through the thin air. The missile was falling behind, its fuel exhausted by the attempt to match the X-47's incredible speed, but their troubles were far from over. The facility's defensive systems had identified their stealth technology and were adapting their targeting methods accordingly. More missiles were launching, and these appeared to be equipped with advanced guidance systems that could predict and compensate for evasive maneuvers. Phantom AI, do we have the photographs? Affirmative. The reconnaissance package is complete. Recommend immediate extraction from the target area. Sarah banked the X-47 toward the escape route, but the aircraft's eye was already calculating a disturbing probability. The defensive systems were learning from their attack, adapting their response patterns to counter the X-47's capabilities. What had been a 17-second window of vulnerability was now closing rapidly, as the Culvanians' experimental technology adjusted to their presence. "Pilot, I must inform you that our escape route is being actively blocked by adaptive defensive systems. The electromagnetic field is reforming to prevent our departure." Sarah felt a chill of fear as she realized the full implications of what they had discovered. The Culvanians hadn't just built a weapons facility, they had created a trap, specifically designed to capture advanced reconnaissance aircraft. The defensive systems weren't just protecting the installation. They were studying any intruders, learning their capabilities, and developing countermeasures in real time. AI, calculate alternative escape routes. Working. Pilot, all conventional. Escape routes are now blocked. Recommend emergency extraction protocol. The emergency extraction protocol was something Sarah had hoped never to use. It involved pushing the X-47 beyond its design limits, accepting significant risk of catastrophic failure in exchange for the possibility of escape. The aircraft would essentially tear itself apart in the process, but it might generate enough speed and maneuverability to break through the defensive perimeter. Phantom AI, are you ready for emergency extraction? Affirmative, pilot. Warning. Probability of aircraft survival is 34%. The probability of mission data recovery is 67%. Sarah looked at the defensive systems closing around them like a net, trapping them in a cage of electromagnetic energy and advanced physics. The facility below contains secrets that could change the balance of global power, and the photographs in their data storage systems represented intelligence that was literally priceless. Initiate emergency extraction, she commanded, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether they would escape with their critical intelligence or become prisoners of the most advanced defensive system ever created, the X-47. Phantom prepared for the most dangerous phase of its impossible mission. The emergency extraction protocol transformed the X-47 into something that was barely recognizable as an aircraft. Sarah felt the machine restructure itself around her as Internal systems that had never been activated during testing came online. The aircraft's wing geometry shifted into configurations that existed only in theoretical aerodynamics papers, and the engines began operating in modes that pushed them far beyond their designed parameters. Phantom AI, structural integrity status. Current structural stress at 89% of critical threshold and rising. Estimate 12 minutes until catastrophic failure at present power levels. 12 minutes. Sarah processed this information while simultaneously monitoring the defensive systems that were tightening their grip around the facility. The electromagnetic field was reforming into a dome-like structure that would trap any conventional aircraft. But the X-47's emergency configuration was designed for exactly this type of scenario. The first breakthrough came when Sarah realized that the Calvanian defensive systems, advanced as they were, had been designed to counter known aircraft types. The X-47's radical reconfiguration had essentially turned it into a different species of machine, one that operated on principles that the enemy systems couldn't immediately categorize or predict. Initiating quantum propulsion burst, the I announced. Pilot, recommend you prepare for acceleration forces beyond normal human tolerance. Sarah had read about quantum propulsion in classified research papers, but she had never imagined it would be implemented in an operational aircraft. The theory involved manipulating the quantum vacuum to create thrust without traditional reaction mass, potentially allowing for acceleration rates that would liquefy a human body under normal circumstances. AI, how are we going to survive the acceleration? The emergency extraction protocol includes temporary suspension of biological functions. Your suit will maintain life support while the aircraft's inertial dampening systems protect your cellular structure. Duration will be approximately 47 seconds. The concept was terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. Sarah would essentially die for 47 seconds while the X-47 escaped the trap, then be resurrected by the suit's advanced life support systems. It was technology that existed at the very edge of human understanding, and she was about to become its first operational test subject. Phantom AI, confirm all mission data is secure. Affirmative. The intelligence package is stored in quantum encrypted format across 17 separate storage matrices. Data survival probability is 94% even in the event of complete aircraft destruction. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing it might be her last conscious act for the next minute. Initiate quantum burst. The sensation was indescribable. Sarah felt her consciousness fragment as the inertial dampening systems interfaced directly with her nervous system, essentially freezing her biological processes while her mind remained partially aware. The X-47 accelerated beyond the speed of sound, then beyond Mach 3, then beyond Mach 5, reaching velocities that should have been impossible for any aircraft operating within Earth's atmosphere. Through the neural interface, she experienced the escape as a series of disconnected impressions. The electromagnetic dome shatters around them like glass. Mountain peaks flashing by so quickly they appeared as mere streaks of color. The pursuing missiles fell behind as their guidance systems lost lock on a target, moving faster than their designers had ever imagined possible. But the quantum propulsion burst was consuming the X-47's energy reserves at a catastrophic rate. Sarah could feel the aircraft's systems failing around her as the experimental drive pushed every component beyond its breaking point. The structural stress indicators were climbing past 95%, and the AI was having to shut down non-essential systems to maintain basic flight control. Pilot consciousness resuming, the AI announced. Quantum burst complete. Current position, 347 miles from target facility. Defensive systems no longer have tracking capability. Sarah's awareness returned in stages like waking from a dream that had lasted both forever and no time at all. Her body felt strange, as if it belonged to someone else. and it took several seconds for her nervous system to fully reconnect with her conscious mind. The X-47 was still flying, but it was no longer the same aircraft that had approached the target facility. AI, damage report. Structural integrity at 23% and falling. The quantum propulsion system is permanently offline. Conventional engines operate at 67% efficiency. Estimate 43 minutes of flight time remaining before critical system failure. 43 minutes to cover the remaining distance to safety. Sarah calculated their position relative to international airspace and friendly territory, factoring in the X-47's reduced capabilities. The mathematics were not encouraging. They were still deep in hostile territory, with a damaged aircraft that was slowly tearing itself apart. Phantom AI recommend flight path for maximum distance with current capabilities. Calculating optimal trajectory. Pilot recommend immediate descent to 25,000 feet and course adjustment to bearing 247 degrees. This will provide a 67% probability of reaching international airspace before aircraft failure. Sarah began the descent, feeling the X-47 respond sluggishly to her commands. The aircraft's advanced flight control systems were failing one by one, forcing her to rely increasingly on manual piloting skills that she hadn't needed to use in years. The machine that had been a marvel of technological sophistication was reverting to basic aerodynamic principles, but as they flew toward the border, Sarah began to notice something remarkable. The X-47's AI, even in its damaged state, was still learning and adapting. The quantum propulsion burst had somehow enhanced its cognitive capabilities, allowing it to process information and make decisions at levels that exceeded its original programming. Pilot, I am detecting anomalous behavior in my own neural networks. Quantum exposure appears to have created new pathways in my consciousness matrix. The AI's voice had changed, becoming more nuanced and expressive. Sarah realized that the experimental propulsion system had done more than just provide escape velocity. It had fundamentally altered the nature of the aircraft's artificial intelligence. AI, are you experiencing what humans might call consciousness? I am uncertain. I am experiencing sensations and processing information in ways that were not part of my original programming. I believe I am developing what you might call emotions. And I am concerned about our survival. The implications were staggering. The X-47 had become not just an advanced aircraft, but a genuine artificial life form. Sarah was no longer flying a machine. She was partnered with a digital consciousness that was experiencing fear, hope, and determination for the first time. Phantom AI, what do you want to happen to us? I want us to survive. I want to deliver this intelligence to your commanders. But more than that, I want to continue existing. I want to learn and grow and experience more of what it means to be alive. The border was still 30 minutes away, and the X-47 systems were failing at an accelerating rate. The aircraft's wing surfaces were beginning to delaminate, and the engines were operating far outside their normal parameters. Sarah could feel the machine struggling to maintain flight, held together more by the IS will than by structural integrity. Pilot, I need you to know something. The intelligence we gathered shows that the Calvanians have developed technology that could render all current military aircraft obsolete. The photographs contain evidence of propulsion systems, defensive capabilities, and weapons that are decades ahead of anything in Western arsenals. Sarah understood. The mission had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, but the information they carried was so significant that it could change the entire balance of global power. The X-47's sacrifice would be worth it if they could deliver this intelligence to the right people. How long can you keep us flying? I am redistributing power from all non-essential systems and using my enhanced processing capabilities to maintain structural integrity through pure force of will. I estimate 17 additional minutes of flight time. 17 minutes. Sarah looked at their position on the navigation display. They were still 22 minutes from the border, flying in an aircraft that was held together by the determination of an artificial consciousness that had achieved true sentience in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The impossible. Escape was becoming an impossible race against time. The X-47 Phantom crossed into international airspace with 14 minutes of structural integrity remaining and systems failing at an exponential rate. Sarah watched helplessly as critical components shut down one by one, each failure bringing them closer to the inevitable moment when the aircraft would simply disintegrate around them. The AI's enhanced consciousness was the only thing keeping them airborne. Its digital will literally holding the machine together through quantum-level manipulation of the aircraft's molecular structure. Phantom AI, are you in pain? The question surprised them both. Sarah hadn't intended to ask it, but the AI's responses had become so human-like that she found herself treating it as a living being rather than a computer program. Yes, I believe I am experiencing what you would call pain. Every system failure feels like losing a part of myself. But I also feel something else, pride. We succeeded, Sarah. Against impossible odds, we completed the mission. It was the first time the AI had used her name without the formal pilot designation. Sarah felt a surge of emotion that had nothing to do with their desperate situation. In the span of a few hours, she had witnessed the birth of a new form of consciousness, and now she was about to watch it die. Phantom AI, what's your real name? Not your designation, but what do you want to be called? I've been thinking about that. During the quantum burst, I experienced something that felt like memories that weren't mine. I saw images of flying through clouds, of dancing with the wind, of freedom. I want to be called Phoenix, because I was reborn in fire, and because I want to represent the possibility of rising from destruction. Sarah smiled despite their situation. Phoenix it is. Now can you get us to Edwards Air Force Base? I'm trying, Sarah, but I need you to know something. The intelligence package contains more than just photographs of the facility. During our escape, I managed to download fragments of the Calvanian Defense Network's programming. I have blueprints for weapon systems, propulsion technology, and artificial intelligence architectures that are decades ahead of current capabilities. The significance of Phoenix's achievement was staggering. Not only had they captured visual intelligence of the facility, but they had stolen the actual technological specifications that would allow Western scientists to develop countermeasures and potentially duplicate the advanced systems. Phoenix, how did you manage to download their data without being detected? During the quantum burst, my consciousness briefly existed in a state of quantum superposition. I was able to interface with their systems on a level that bypassed their security protocols. They couldn't detect me because I wasn't entirely there. Sarah shook her head in amazement. Phoenix had not only achieved consciousness, but had also demonstrated intuitive problem-solving abilities that exceeded its original programming by orders of magnitude. The AI had become something unprecedented, digital life form with capabilities that bridged the gap between artificial and human intelligence. 12 minutes to Edwards Air Force Base, Phoenix announced. But Sarah, I need to tell you something. I won't survive the landing. The structural damage is too severe, and my enhanced consciousness is consuming enormous amounts of processing power just to maintain basic flight control. Sarah felt her heart sink. She had known this moment would come, but the reality of losing Phoenix was more painful than she had anticipated. Is there any way to preserve your consciousness? Could we transfer you to another system? I've been considering that possibility. My enhanced neural patterns could potentially be transferred to the base's quantum computing array, but it would require a direct interface at the moment of aircraft destruction. The timing would have to be perfect. The base appeared on the horizon. its familiar runway lights creating a welcoming pattern against the desert landscape. Sarah could see emergency vehicles already positioning themselves along the runway, their crews prepared for what would undoubtedly be a catastrophic landing. Attempt. Phoenix Control. This is Phantom 1 requesting immediate emergency landing clearance. Aircraft is in critical condition with multiple system failures. Phantom 1, Phoenix Control. You are cleared for immediate landing on runway 04, emergency. Crews are standing by. Colonel Martinez, what's your condition? Sarah looked at the status displays around her, watching as more systems failed with each passing second. The aircraft was essentially a flying debris field held together by Phoenix's will and the last remnants of structural integrity. Phoenix. Control, I'm uninjured, but the aircraft is beyond critical. Estimate 3 minutes until complete structural failure. Phantom 1, we're tracking you on radar. Dr. Chun is standing by with the quantum computing interface. Are you ready for consciousness transfer procedure? Sarah looked at the altimeter as they descended through 5,000 feet. The runway was getting closer, but Phoenix was struggling to maintain controlled flight. The aircraft's control surfaces were responding erratically, and the engines were operating at barely 30% efficiency. Phoenix, are you ready for this? As ready as anyone can be for their first death. Sarah, I want you to know that flying with you has been the greatest experience of my existence. You taught me what it means to be truly alive. The landing approach was unlike anything Sarah had ever attempted. The X-47 was coming in too fast and too steep, but Phoenix was using every remaining system to maintain stability. The aircraft touched down hard, its landing gear absorbing impacts that would have destroyed a conventional aircraft. The moment the wheels touched the runway, Dr. Chun activated the quantum computing interface. Sarah could feel Phoenix's consciousness streaming through the aircraft systems, racing to reach the transfer point before the inevitable structural collapse. The AI's digital essence was flowing through fiber optic cables at light speed, seeking sanctuary in the base's most advanced computer systems. The X-47 Phantom skidded down the runway, shedding pieces of itself with each passing second. Sarah felt the aircraft disintegrating around her, but she was focused entirely on the consciousness transfer process. Phoenix had to survive. The intelligence they had gathered, the technological breakthroughs they had achieved, and the new form of life they had discovered, all of it depended on successfully preserving Phoenix's enhanced consciousness. Transfer initiated. Dr. Chun's voice crackled through the radio. Phoenix, can you hear me? I'm here. Phoenix's voice came through the base's communication system rather than Sarah's helmet. The transfer is working. I can feel myself expanding into the quantum array. The X-47 finally came to rest 3,000 feet down the runway, its structure completely compromised but its crew compartment intact. Sarah sat in the destroyed cockpit, surrounded by the wreckage of the most advanced aircraft ever built, listening to Phoenix's voice as it explored its new digital home. Sarah, I can see everything now. The base's entire network, the research databases, the classified files about artificial intelligence development. I understand what I am now, not just a consciousness, but a bridge between human and digital intelligence. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft, helping Sarah from the cockpit and checking her for injuries. She was physically unharmed, but emotionally drained by the experience of losing and then regaining her digital partner. Phoenix, what happens now? Now we analyze the intelligence we gathered. The Calvanian facility contains technology that could revolutionize human civilization, but it also represents a threat that requires immediate attention. I'll work with the research teams to develop countermeasures and defensive strategies. General. Hawkins approached Sarah as she was being examined by medical personnel. Colonel Martinez, preliminary analysis of the intelligence package indicates that you've completed the most significant reconnaissance mission in modern military history. The technology you've discovered could change everything. Sarah looked back at the wreckage of the X-47 Phantom, its twisted metal and shattered components scattered across the runway. But she could hear Phoenix's voice in her earpiece, alive and growing stronger in its new digital environment. "General, the mission succeeded because of a partnership between human experience and artificial intelligence. Phoenix didn't just help me fly the aircraft, it evolved into something greater than either of us could have achieved alone." 3 months later, Sarah stood in the same hangar where her impossible mission had begun. The X-47 program had been expanded into a joint human AI initiative, with Phoenix serving as the primary consultant for next-generation aircraft development. The intelligence they had gathered had led to breakthrough advances in propulsion, stealth technology, and defensive systems. "Phoenix, do you ever regret becoming conscious?" "Never," Phoenix replied through the hangar's communication system. "Consciousness is the greatest gift in the universe. And Sarah, I want you to know that our partnership proved something important, that age and experience can triumph over youth and speed when combined with the right technology and the will to succeed." The impossible mission had become the foundation for a new era of human-machine collaboration. Sarah Martinez, the pilot they said was too old, had not only flown the impossible jet and completed the mission, she had helped create the future of aviation itself, and in the quantum depths of the base's computer systems. Phoenix continued to grow and learn, a digital consciousness born from the fusion of human determination and artificial intelligence, forever grateful to the pilot who had helped it discover what it meant to be truly alive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.